This is the eternal story of the shadow. We all live out this story, and if you understand it, you can prevent it from ending how it often does: tragedy. You see this story in Fight Club, in Walter White. It is the hero's journey, but for your inner villain. Here is what you should know about it. So you never see it, but your mind works like a seesaw. On one side is your shadow, and on the other side is your ego, your conscious self. Both of these represent completely opposing traits. Put too much weight on one side and the seesaw flips. The constant goal is equilibrium. You want to have a balance between both your shadow and your conscious ego. A lot of human potential is dangerous to society. Rebellion, violence, psychopathy. That is why society trains us when we are young to abandon all of these. The problem though is that we cannot unlearn them, we can only forget them. And so they get lodged into the unconscious and come alive through the shadow. Stories can give us a look into our own psyche, and this is very well represented in many of them. The shadow-possessed individual is an archetypal character. Think about Tyler Durden. He is the perfect personified form of the shadow. The main character, Edward Norton, doesn't integrate his shadow, and so it overcomes him. The beginning of his story shows him as a deadened individual, as is also the case with Walter White. This means that the shadow is ever strong. It has a lot of energy even though the conscious individual is not aware of it. The seesaw is falling apart, and even though you don't see it, your shadow is stronger than ever and darker than ever. Before you know it, the seesaw flips, and so does the whole personality. Walter becomes somebody completely different, and so does Edward Norton. That is why Jordan Peterson says that you should become a monster and then learn how to control it. If you don't consciously become a monster and then learn how to control it, you will unconsciously become one, and the monster will control you rather than vice versa. Think about this. How come people are never confused watching movies about rapists or murderers or criminals? How come? Because whenever we're watching a movie, really we're identifying with the hero and living the story through him. We're identifying with the protagonist. And if the protagonist is a murderer, an evil person, then how can we relate to him? I think we can relate with the evil people of the world because to some extent we are all evil. We all have the ability to be evil even though we are not conscious of it. And that part of us is our shadow. These are the traits of ours that we don't want to become conscious of, that we don't want to accept. But if we don't accept them for long enough, then over time they will overpower us. They will overcome us. The shadow is important because without it, civilized society cannot exist. Without it, we are still animals. Society can only exist when each of us sacrifice some freedom for it. We do that through our personas, through metaphorical masks that we wear. The mask of student, teacher, parent, child. These tell us what we need to do, and as long as we are living up to them, society can still function cooperatively. These personas set expectations for us, and if we live up to them, then society can maintain itself. The problem comes though when we confuse ourselves with the masks that we wear. When we confuse our real self with the mask that we place on top of it, we lose our real self. Personas are first introduced into our lives when we're young, when we're first being introduced into society. This is when the shadow is first created. And over time, as the persona is refined, the shadow becomes more and more darkened, more and more blackened, and we are less and less aware of it. And as tends to be the case with depression, things that are repressed tend to burst out of you when they actually come out. This is where the shadow can get whole countries wrapped up in trouble, and it is all because of projection. We deny our own shadow traits, we don't know that they exist, but we also project them onto others. We see evil in our enemy, partly because we fail to see it in ourselves. That is why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Whatever we don't like about ourselves, we project onto others and see as traits that they have. If you don't consciously develop a healthy relationship with your shadow, it will get in the way needlessly. You will get enraged when you don't need to. You will become uncontrolled when you don't need to. That is why you need to integrate your shadow. And that is the last phase of the eternal story of the shadow. And most people never reach this phase. The concept of shadow integration is a pretty complex one. You cannot really say anything that applies to all cases. But I found Carl Jung's advice pretty helpful. He was the first one to create the idea of the shadow. And here is what he says. 1. Accept and take seriously the existence of the shadow. 2. Become aware of its qualities and intentions. This happens through active attention to moods, fantasies, and impulses. You can do this in 3 ways. 1. Learn to be consciously aware of when your shadow overcomes you and what patterns it follows. 2. Use the qualities you like about yourself to understand the qualities you dislike about yourself. When are you most those qualities? 3. Manage your inner dialogue. We all speak to ourselves, whether it's conscious or unconscious. That can be a reflection of your relationship with your shadow. And 3, a long process of negotiation is unavoidable. Aim to develop a healthy relationship with your shadow over time. Don't just aim to integrate it instantly, because that is not going to be very easy. Try to look at how you have repressed your shadow and how it presents itself to you. It is going to be unique to your situation, and maybe your past can give you hints about the nature of your shadow. That is a path that you'll have to figure out for yourself, because it's different for every one of us. If you think about it, the shadow is a very interesting thing. It made the Second World War much worse than it needed to be. And it is a very interesting story how that mapped out. I actually have a video on it, and you should probably check it out right here. I'll see you in the next one, and bye-bye.